They burned her service journal in front of her unit. Every word was already in the Admiral's safe. The rain fell sideways across the flight deck, and nobody moved. Lieutenant Commander Ava Reyes stood at attention while her own handwriting curled into ash 6 inches from her chest. And the only sound louder than the flames was the silence of 300 sailors who didn't know whether to look away or bear witness. She had written that journal to save herself. She never imagined it would be used to destroy her. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. Captain Daniel Hargrove held the burning book like it weighed nothing, though everyone on that deck knew exactly how much it cost. 3 years of entries. Every deployment. Every near miss. Every night Ava couldn't sleep because of what she'd seen in the engine room fire of 2023. He had ordered it burned as punishment, as a lesson, as a message to an entire unit. Insubordination has consequences, and consequences leave no record behind. That was the point. No record. No proof. No journal for anyone to read later and ask uncomfortable questions about what really happened the night 3 sailors nearly died and 1 officer's negligence got buried under a commendation instead of a court-martial. Ava didn't cry because she was weak. She cried because she understood, in that moment, exactly how much power a man could wield when he believed no one was watching. He was wrong. The wind carried the smoke sideways, and somewhere behind the rows of white hats, a young ensign named Priya Malhotra pressed her hand over her mouth, not from horror alone, but from something closer to disbelief. She had heard the rumors for weeks, that Hargrove wanted Reyes gone, that the accident report from the engine room fire didn't match what she told him privately, that a woman who wrote things down was a woman who couldn't be trusted to forget. Priya had assumed, like everyone assumes about the powerful, that Hargrove was simply venting frustration. Watching the fire eat through Ava's handwriting, she realized this wasn't frustration at all. This was erasure. Ava's hands trembled at her sides, not with fear, but with the effort of standing still while a piece of her identity turned to embers on a steel deck in the rain. She thought about her mother, who used to say that a woman's words were the one thing nobody could take from her, as long as she kept them somewhere safe. She thought about the nights she'd sat cross-legged in her berth writing by flashlight because she didn't trust the ship systems, didn't trust the official channels, didn't trust that the truth would survive contact with men who had rank and reputation to protect. She had been right not to trust them. She had just been wrong about one thing. She thought she'd never see the truth survive this moment. She was wrong. Because 6 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday that felt like any other, Ava had done something that would only make sense to her once the flames finally died down. She had photographed every page. Not out of paranoia exactly, though maybe it was paranoia, the kind that keeps careful people alive in dangerous places, but out of a simple, aching intuition that something was building against her. She had scanned each page into a secure file and mailed a physical copy to someone she trusted with a request stamped across the envelope. Hold for safekeeping, open only if instructed. That someone was Rear Admiral Constance Whitfield, a woman who had mentored Ava since her first year at the academy, who had told her once, over coffee in a nearly empty wardroom, that the Navy did not always protect its own, and that sometimes the only protection available was the truth, written down and placed somewhere no one could reach it. The crowd on the deck didn't know any of this yet. All they saw was a captain destroying a young officer's private record in front of her peers, and a young officer standing there taking it, saying nothing, offering no defense. Some of the sailors assumed she must have done something terrible to deserve this kind of public reckoning. Whispers moved through the ranks like static electricity. What did she write? What did she do? Why would he burn it instead of just filing a report? A few of the older chiefs exchanged glances that said they'd seen this play before, seen careers ended not through justice but through spectacle, and they hated how familiar it felt. This is where the story asks something uncomfortable of everyone watching. Because in that moment, most of the unit believed the man in command must have a reason. That's what discipline teaches people. Trust the chain, trust the uniform, trust that authority earns its power through fairness. But authority isn't the same as truth, and the deck grew heavier with that realization the longer the silence stretched. Was loyalty to rank the same as loyalty to what's right? Ava's own silence wasn't submission. It was patience. She had learned the hard way that the moment to fight is not always the moment you're standing in. Sometimes the moment to fight already happened, weeks earlier, quietly, when nobody was looking. The fire finally consumed the last page, and Hargrove dropped the blackened spine onto the wet deck, where it hissed once and went dark. He looked at Ava the way a man looks at something he believes he has finally silenced. He turned to address the assembled sailors, ready to deliver a closing statement about standards and consequences, when the intercom crackled to life across the flight deck speakers. Unscheduled, unauthorized by anyone standing there, patched directly from communications at the request of a four-star office 3,000 miles away. Admiral Whitfield's voice arrived like weather changing. Calm, unhurried, devastating. She confirmed, for every sailor on that deck to hear, that she had received a complete digital record of Lieutenant Commander Reyes's service journal 6 weeks prior, along with a formal request for an independent review of the engine room incident. She confirmed that federal investigators had already begun cross-referencing those entries against the ship's official reports. She confirmed, in a tone that never once raised in volume, that destroying evidence in front of witnesses during an active review was not discipline. It was obstruction. The deck went utterly still. Rain kept falling, but even the rain seemed quieter. Hargrove's face didn't move for a long moment, the particular stillness of a man doing frantic math behind calm eyes. Every sailor who had whispered doubts about Ava now felt those doubts reverse direction all at once, a tide pulling back from shore. Priya lowered her hand from her mouth and looked at Ava. Really looked at her, and saw not a woman who had been caught, but a woman who had been waiting. What happened next unfolded with the choreography of people who had rehearsed nothing but somehow moved as one. Master Chief Alvarez stepped forward first, breaking formation just slightly, enough to stand beside Ava rather than across from her. Then Priya. Then 2 more junior officers who had quietly admired Reyes's steadiness for years without ever saying so aloud. It wasn't mutiny. It wasn't even defiance, not exactly. It was simply a unit remembering all at once who had actually kept them safe during that engine room fire, and who had spent the following months trying to bury it. Hargrove was relieved of his post within the week, pending investigation and Ava's testimony. Preserved, protected, patient, became the backbone of a case that finally forced the ship's chain of command to answer for what they tried to erase in fire and silence. Ava didn't celebrate. She stood at the rail that evening, watching the last gray light fade over water the color of gunmetal, and she thought about how close the truth had come to disappearing forever, dependent entirely on one small act of foresight months before anyone knew it would matter. Because kindness doesn't vanish. It waits, and it finds its way back. And so does the truth, if someone loves it enough to protect it before the fire ever comes. Somewhere on that same deck, ash still clung to the wet steel, and rain kept washing it toward the sea. But the words themselves, the ones that mattered, had already found a safer harbor than anyone standing there that night could have burned. If the story moved you, tell us where in the world you're watching from, and let us know what you would have done standing on that deck. Subscribe if you believe the truth deserves a place to hide until it's ready to come home, and share this with someone who needs to hear that the record always finds a way to survive.